I am Laura Dixon, and you are listening to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast, episode number 149, Emotion versus Feeling. Welcome to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast. I'm going to teach you how to get out of your diet brain so that you too can be naturally thin for life. No counting, restricting, or obsessing. I am going to take the mystery out of it for you so that you can become naturally thin starting today. Are you ready? Let's do this. All right, friends. I have been wanting to share what I'm going to share with you today for several months now, but I kept going back and forth because there's some science I want to share with you, and I, at my heart, am kind of a super nerd. So I love to know all the geeky things. And so I've been thinking about how to share some of that with you and share it in a way that has the most impact in your life. And what I'm going to share with you today, it's everything. And what I mean by that is this is the key to being naturally thin. Just this episode. If you take away and you apply and you use this episode, this is what you need to be naturally thin. It is the key. I see it time and time again with women in the Naturally Thin for Life program when they understand what I'm going to teach you today. And I'm going to teach you a little bit more of the background of the why it's so important and give you some of the science behind that. Because when I understand why I'm doing something, it makes it so much easier for me to then implement consistently and sort of see the path forward and see where I'm going. And this is the key to feeling in control. It's why if you listen to Sue's podcast episode a couple of weeks ago, she said, I felt in control within a week. And it's because she understood and applied what we're going to talk about in today's episode. And feeling in control, I hear from so many of you. And it was what I always wanted. I wanted to wake up in the morning and say to myself, I'm not going to binge tonight, and actually not binge. I used to wake up in the morning and tell myself that, but then maybe go a day or two and white knuckle and grit and grind my way through it and maybe not binge, but then inevitably binge again, right? Or I'd wake up in the morning and then a couple hours later, I'd be overeating. I just felt so out of my control. So what I want for all of you is to see how possible it is for you to feel in control around food when you understand emotions and feelings. And your emotions and your feelings, we often use those words interchangeably. And there's a good reason why, but today I'm going to differentiate them for you because it can be super helpful in your ability to change your emotional state to drive habits that you actually want to have. And everything we do, and I'm going to explain why this is the case in today's episode, but everything we do and everything we don't do, all of our action and inaction comes from an emotion. It comes from the emotions that are in our body. Our brain thinks thoughts, and our body carries out those thoughts through emotions. Emotions are the chemical signature in our body that is derived predominantly from how we're thinking. And some of those emotions as well become habitual emotions. And we're going to talk more about that in today's episode and how to break some of those habitual emotions. But before we dive in, I want to give you a simple example. I want you to think about two different situations and just feel this difference in your body. I want you to think about someone that you get frustrated by. So let's say you're driving to work listening to this episode and you're thinking, like my boss, she just doesn't even know what she's doing, right? Let's say you think that thought, try that one on for a minute, right? Or try on how you think about someone in your life where you constantly feel frustrated, right? So when you're thinking that in your brain and you're imagining your boss and you're like, she doesn't even know what she's doing, right? You might feel annoyed, irritated, or angry. And I want you to actually feel that in your body. And then I want you to imagine someone that you adore, right? So if I imagine, Gemma, who's 3, and I just think, oh, like that sweet little face, right? What I feel in my body then might be love, joy, or connected, or grateful, right? I want you to feel that shift in your body. right? You just did that with your brain. You felt an actual shift in your body. And if you imagine all of your cells in your body vibrating and dancing together, it's a very different dance thinking about your boss, right? In my example, compared to me thinking about my daughter. The dance in my body has a stark contrast. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about how to create more of those feelings you want to feel and less of the feelings that you don't want to feel, that are driving habits that you don't want, and how to stop fearing some of those emotions. And it's really important to understand this. I'm going to give you the high level concept here, and then I'm going to share with you some of the science to help your brain really understand what's happening in your body. So emotions are chemically what's happening in your body. I think about it like this is the chemical signature in my body. And your feelings are your awareness of that chemical signature, right? So when people say, oh, I'm just like not good with feelings, right? It doesn't mean they don't have emotion in their body. They have to have emotion. Emotion is the energy in motion that drives everything your body does and doesn't do, right? So just because you're not good at feelings doesn't mean you don't have emotion in your body. You just might not be that good at being aware of what those emotions are, right? A lot of us don't learn this skill. And I was talking to a couple of the other women in the Naturally Thin for Life program, and they were like, what, like, how is this not taught in kindergarten, right? If emotions drive everything we do and everything we don't do, and our feelings are our awareness of those emotions, and we can actually change them, they're almost like mad about it. They're like, how do we not learn this when we're 6 years old? And I'm like, I know. I feel the same way. And I am going to share now some of the science behind this so you can visually understand it. I love to imagine things visually, and when I can understand visually what's happening in my body and why this is so important to change your relationship with food, to change your relationship with your body, when you understand the science I'm going to share with you today, then it makes it so much easier to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. So there is a book called The Molecules of Emotion, and I'm going to quote some of that book in today's episode. So it's a book by Candace Pert, and it is a book that was quite sciencey for me in the beginning. I listened to many parts multiple times and had to Google many things. She has passed away, but she had a PhD and was a researcher and did a lot of like on the frontier research around receptor sites and in a lot of other research that she did along the way. But so she shares a lot of her research journey. And so for me, like I said, I'm like a super nerd at my heart, but I went through this book several times, and there's a lot of other resources I have used as well. But I love the way she talks about emotions in this book and just the visual imagery that she gave to those emotions and what's happening in our body. So some of this is from the book, The Molecules of Emotion. And so I'm going to share with you some of the science, and then we're going to tie it back into why this is so critical when you want to lose weight for good, when you want to be naturally thin and never worry about it again. So she says in the book, she says, water molecules weigh 18 units of molecular weight. Now, listen, before I keep going, do you want to turn it off? We're not going to be too sciencey here, but I'm just going to give you some science so that you understand. And if you don't, I will bring it back with some examples. Okay, so some water molecules weigh 18 units of molecular weight, while receptor molecules weigh about 50,000 units of molecular weight. And when energy is applied to water, right, it may turn into a gas. And when energy is applied to receptor sites, they vibrate, shimmy, and shake. And these receptor sites are on every cell on the oily outer boundary or the membrane of the cell, right? So if you imagine back from like biology days, there's cells, and then there's receptor sites on the membrane of these cells. And receptors are made of protein, tiny amino acid chains. She says beaded necklace folded in on itself. Like, I remember that from biology class. I don't know if any of you do. Right? Some of you may be in the field, so you're like, well, obviously, right? But for those of you that aren't, like, I remember those like pictures of beaded necklaces, right? So she says receptors are made of protein, tiny amino acid chains, beaded necklaces folded onto themselves. And if assigned a color, and this was many years ago, so it may be even more than this, but she said at the time, if assigned a color, to each receptor that scientists have identified, there would be at least 70 hues of color on each cell's surface, right? So if each receptor site on a cell was given a color, there would be 70 hues of color. So essentially a potential 70 ways for a binding to that receptor site to occur on one single cell, 70. And then she says these receptors sense and vibrate like dancing, waiting to receive vibrations from other vibrating mechanisms, right? So imagine a cell just kind of dancing and vibrating and has all these receptor sites on its outer membrane. And then she says sort of like a keyhole, except not quite, because these quote unquote keyholes are moving in a rhythmic vibratory way. And then she goes on to say other amino acid chains, proteins, bind to these receptors like fingers fitting together as a perfect match. So sometimes we will hear binding talked about like a lock and a key, right? And it kind of is, but as they're binding, her point is there's a vibrant rhythmic motion like fingers fitting together in a perfect match, that it isn't just a simple lock, key, turn. There is a vibrating dance that happens. And then she says the ligand is responsible for dancing and swaying on the chemical lock of a receptor site. It's the key that unlocks the receptor site when the amino acid has attached to a receptor site and it's a match. She said it tickles until it clicks a doorway open into the cell and it passes into the membrane. And a ligand is any substance that either occurs naturally or is man-made that binds selectively to its own specific receptor on the surface of a cell. Right? So the ligand is the vibrating mechanism, right, that comes and vibrates with the receptor site on the cell. But a ligand can't fit into every single receptor site. A ligand fits into selective receptor sites when they are this match. So then she goes on to say, when the lock and the key are a fit, the molecule vibrates, right? So the cell vibrates then when there's a receptor site and the ligand comes and they fit and they shimmy and they dance, right? And then the molecule vibrates and it changes shape until the lock and the key are fully turned and they click the doorway open into the cell. And now the receptor has received a message, right? That ligand is bringing a message. The receptor has now received a message and transmits that message now from the surface of the cell into the cell's interior. And it can change the state of a cell. So the cell might, from this message, make new proteins, divide, open new ion channels, make a new chemical group, right? The cell is going to do something now because it has information from this ligand. So remember, right? Every cell has receptor sites on its surface. And then ligands come and they only fit into particular receptor sites. Particular ligands need to have, right, the right keyhole for them to fit in, right? So if you imagine a lock and a key, right? A lock and a key, not all locks and keys fit together, right? There's only like one lock and key combination that fit into my front door, right? It's the same with receptor sites. Not every ligand can fit into every receptor site. They have to have a match. And when they do, they vibrate, shimmy, and shake. And then that message goes into the cell. So then she goes on to say, and she says, what the cell is up to at any given moment is determined by what receptor sites are activated with the appropriate ligands at any given moment, right? So I'm like, okay, this all makes total sense. And there are 3 types of ligands. There are neurotransmitters that carry information across gaps in our brain between neurons over synapses, right? And I don't know if you remember, I remember those pictures and I looked them up again recently, right? Of those synapses where neurotransmitters carry and they go across the gap. A lot of times you see like between the gap, there's like, it looks like I'm imagining it, it's like there's these little beads of information, right? Those are the neurotransmitters and they flow across and then they attach to the other side to carry information to another neuron. And then she goes on to talk about the other 2 types of ligands, which are steroids and peptides. And peptides are by far the largest category of ligands. And neurons, when we think of neurons, right, we think of nerve cells that are in our brain, but we actually have neurons in other parts of our body, right? So there are different practices that talk about different energy centers. And the reason they talk about those energy centers is because that is where there is a cluster of neurons. So neurons aren't only in our brain, but we actually have these nerve cells in other parts of our body as well. Then she goes on to say, neurotransmitters are much simpler in the messages they carry that are more in the forms of on or off to the receiving nerve cell, whereas neuropeptides go much longer distances into spinal fluid and within our whole nervous system and to intracellular areas and carry much more complicated messages and can have a much more profound effect on the cells to which they bind to the receptor site. Right? And so neuropeptides, when she talks about in this book, we can have a neuropeptide in our brain that then goes a long distance into the body by the time it actually binds to its receptor site. And she said these peptides that are produced in the brain, they find receptor sites all throughout the body. So if emotion is the lock and the key of a ligand and a receptor site moving into the cell, right? So the emotion is that energy in motion of a message in the form of a ligand coming into and binding to the receptor site on a cell and carrying that message into the body. That's the energy in motion and the emotion. It's therefore creating a vibrational frequency once it is inside the cell and it delivers a message to the cell. And that message will foster different behaviors of the cell, and it can foster disease and healing. And she goes on and she talks a lot about cancer research and many other things in this book. So she goes on to say emotions both are brain information into the body and body information to the brain. It's a two-way communication street. And she talks about former research that thought that only the amygdala and the hypothalamus and the hippocampus were the kind of classical parts of the brain considered to be responsible for emotions. But there's so much research that has come out, and I've seen this time and time again from other people, that emotions go two ways. That we can also, we've talked about this before on the podcast, but we can also, our body will send a signal to our brain, and our brain will create those peptides to then come back into the body to then have the lock and key happening that then we vibrate and we feel that quote unquote familiar emotion. It's why for me, it was so conditioned to feel anxiety. So then she goes on to say, emotions and bodily functions are often intertwined in this bi-directional, right, two-way network where they can influence each other. And usually it happens unconsciously, but we can make it conscious in certain conditions with intention. This is the key. We're going to talk more about this and talk more about why this is so important in a minute or two, but think about that. I'm going to say it again. Emotions and bodily functions are intertwined in a bi-directional two-way network where they can influence each other. And it usually happens unconsciously, but we can make it conscious in certain conditions with intention. So your emotions and your bodily functions are intertwined. So if you want to change your relationship with a bodily function, like eating and digesting and eliminating, and change your body weight and how your body stores and releases its fat stores, you must understand your emotional state. You must understand your current emotional state and how to change it in a way that allows you to not even want to overeat, that allows your body to release its fat stores. And in this book, she uses emotion to include what she calls also quote unquote drive states, meaning these survival states like thirst and warmth and hunger and pain and pleasure. And why this is so important is because we learn how to respond to these states. Think about hunger, for example, right? This is me now talking. A lot of what I've shared are some of her words, right? And when I said this is what she says, those were her words. This is me now. So why this is so important when we think about losing weight and being naturally thin is because we learn how to respond to these drive states like hunger. So hunger, for many of us, we learn to fear it. And just like Candace says in her book, she says, right, these emotions and bodily functions are intertwined in a bi-directional network where they can influence each other, and it usually happens unconsciously, but we can make it conscious. So hunger, right, being a bodily function, we often learn to fear it unconsciously because maybe we grew up without enough food, or maybe we learned we have to eat all of the food off of our plate, right? Maybe we learned if we don't eat quick, then our brothers and sisters are going to eat the food that's there. right? Or we've dieted, right? And our body was restricted. We were following someone else's rules. And so then we learned to fear hunger, right? Or we forced ourselves into very short fasting windows, right? Or if someone has struggled with an eating disorder, right? Their body has learned to fear hunger, right? Or maybe we were taught that food is what creates love and connection and enjoyment and entertainment, right? We've learned all of those emotional states and tied them to a bodily function of hunger. And if and when we have learned anything other than the neutral, objective bodily state of, oh, I'm hungry, and if that feels anything other than calm and like you're just simply stating an observation, right? If it's anything other than that, then we often have learned to tie an emotional state to hunger that doesn't serve us, right? A lot of us have learned to feel, right? And this happens unconsciously. We've learned, like I'm hungry. It's an emergency. Even the food is like 20 feet away and you maybe have 40 pounds of fat stores that you want to access and use up, right? But our brain and our body, our emotional state and our bodily functions have become so intertwined and we're so unaware and we don't even know what's happened that we're like sitting in a meeting and we have a bunch of snacks available, right? And we want to burn some of our fat stores, but we're sitting in a meeting freaking out because we're hungry and we don't know if we can get through 15 minutes, right? And I say that because that was me and because it's so common, but I want you to hear from this that we've learned that, which is like the best news ever because we can unlearn it. And there is a particular sequence that I teach the women inside the Naturally Thin for Life program. And I have a very structured sequence in which they learn each of the steps, right? Because step one, you must learn how to distinguish a calm, objective, physical hunger from all the stuff we've learned about it, right? All the examples I just gave you. So if you have anything other than just a calm, observational relationship with hunger, right? That's where we start so that you can feel totally calm and you can have emotions related to hunger that truly serve you. Okay, so then in the book, The Molecules of Emotion, Candace goes on to say, she says, emotional states and moods are produced by neuropeptide ligands, and therefore, what we experience as an emotion or a feeling is responsible for activating particular neuronal circuits simultaneously throughout the brain and the body, which generate behavior involving the whole creature with all the necessary physiological changes that behavior would require. Right? So emotional states and moods are produced by neuropeptide ligands. And therefore, what we experience as the human, as the emotion or feeling, is responsible for activating everything needed for us to have the physiological changes to actually take action or inaction. Right? So what she means by that is all the physiological changes that we need to have the energy to stand up from wherever we're sitting and walk to the pantry and open the door and put our hand in and eat the food, right? That all comes from our emotional state, coming from our neuropeptide ligands. And then she goes on to say, she says, peptides are not limited to singular actions within the cell, but they weave the body into a web that responds to both internal and external changes with complex, subtle, orchestrated responses. And I love this example, and this is why I want to say this, because it just helps me visualize what's happening so well. She says peptides, right? And remember, peptides are one of the 3 ligands. They're the most predominant, and they're the ones that can travel long ways into our body. So she says peptides are the sheet music containing the notes and the phrases and the rhythms, right? So if you've ever played or seen people perform, right, when you go to an orchestra, you can just imagine, right? There might be 50 different instruments and 50 different people playing the music, right? And each person has sheet music. And sometimes, right, all the violins might be playing the same exact music, right? And then the person playing the piano might be playing something different, right? Or sometimes some of the violins are playing different music, right? Dependent upon what they're playing, right? And the purpose of what they're doing in the orchestra, right? But if you imagine the orchestra, hear it again. She says the peptides are the sheet music containing the notes and the phrases and the rhythms. Okay, so everybody in the orchestra has the sheet music, which are the peptides, right? And remember, the peptides are what are attaching to those receptor sites and shaking and vibrating and sending messages into each individual cell, right? So each individual cell, imagine like, right, a person in the orchestra playing an instrument. So peptides are the sheet music containing the notes, phrases, and rhythms that allow the orchestra, and the orchestra is your entire body, that allow the orchestra, your body, to play as an integrated entity. And the music that results is the tone of the awareness of the emotion, right? So those peptides, like I was talking earlier, as she was explaining, right? Each cell has receptor sites. And when those peptides attach to those receptor sites and lock and key into a single individual cell, right? That's like one violin, right? Or one piano player. So that's one individual person. And each one has their own sheet music, right? And it allows the entire orchestra, the entire body, your body, to work as an integrated entity. And the music that results is the tone of the awareness of the emotion, right? So that is all happening chemically in your body. But if you're not aware of what's happening chemically in your body, then you don't know what you're feeling, right? Emotion is what is happening chemically in your body, and your feeling is your awareness of it. So if you're not aware of the tone of the music in your body, it's impossible to change it, right? So when you are aware of the tone of the music playing in your body, then you can understand what is driving everything you're doing and everything you're not doing. And then you can actually change it. We, as the operator of our own brains, have way more control than we think, right? Think about the example I gave you in the beginning when I was talking about just thinking the thought of like, my boss, she doesn't even know what she's doing, right? And feeling irritated and annoyed. And actually having the awareness, feeling that in your body, you can feel that, how quick that shift happens, right? Where you're feeling maybe angry. And then thinking about someone you love, right? When I was sharing the example about my daughter, like, oh, just like that sweet, cute little face. I can feel that love in my body almost instantly, right? When I imagine that and I think that thought. So we, as the operator of our brain, right? We're like the conductor of the orchestra. We can decide the tone of the music, right? And we can also hear the tone of the music and be like, I think that one's a little bit off. Maybe we want to change that and switch up this and do this differently, right? It doesn't mean it's perfect all of the time, but I want you to imagine an orchestra playing and you are the conductor of that orchestra. And it doesn't mean it's perfect 100% of the time, but when you're aware of where you're going and what you want the tone of that music to be, right? You can hear when you're not aligned with that tone, and you can be aware of it and you can change it and you can create the tone in your body that you want. So your body learns familiar emotional states, right? It's why so many of us feel like we're conditioned for anxiety and stress and frantic and urgent. And why, for a lot of us, where we feel like that's the case, then we want to experience joy and excitement and accomplished, but those are often fleeting or they just don't last very long because we haven't learned, we haven't taught our body, we haven't become the conductor of the orchestra that's like, hey, the tone we want is joy. And like, we need to work towards that and increase our capacity for it. We got to practice, we got to rehearse. We have to notice when the tone and the music is off so that we can come back to joy, right? And we need emotions to unlock fat stores, right? If emotions are what's happening chemically in our body, and each peptide attaching to a receptor site is like one person playing in the orchestra, and we want to release energy from our fat stores, we need our emotions to do this. So we need to be aware of what's happening in our body. And living by emotions of stress and rushed and urgent and frantic, more often than not, right? When that's our typical, normal, habitual emotional state compared to more of calm and relaxed and focused and productive and gratitude, right? If we're in a highly rushed emotional state, more often than not, like constantly spinning and to-do listing and just like rushing and rushing and rushing, do you think when your body's in that chemical emotional state, do you think your body's like, hey, I think this would be a really good time to burn those fat stores? Your body's like, no, we don't have time for that. It's in a high stress chemical state. And when our body's in a high stress chemical state, our body's like, we got to just get a quick hit, right? I don't have time to burn those fat stores. Just give me some chocolate or give me some sugar or, give me that croissant, right? Our body's not like, oh, this would be a great time to not fear hunger and just like burn those fat stores for you. So your feelings are your awareness of what is happening chemically in your body. And I don't know about you, but I did not learn this in kindergarten. It seems pretty important though, since emotions drive every behavior, right? And not even like the science of it I didn't learn in kindergarten. I didn't even learn like what feelings were other than like those 12 little pictures on the refrigerator. Like, do you guys remember those? It was like, joy and happy and sad and mad. And then just like these little faces. And then you would move a little square, like a window to whichever one you were feeling today. Like that's what I knew, right? But it seems pretty important to understand that your feelings and your emotions drive everything we do, everything your body is doing, every behavior you have and every behavior you don't have. Seems like something we should maybe learn. So here I am in my 30s. Learning it, and I'm like obsessed with it because I just like like I said, I'm like super nerd. I just like love to learn all the things. So if you're like me, or if you're in your 70s, like who cares? It's time. Now's the time to learn this, right? So we want to be aware of our emotions. And here's another example I want you to think about that can maybe bring it home for some of you. I noticed for me recently, I don't really watch much TV or watch many movies. And recently I was like, I just like want to watch a movie. And so I started watching Runaway Bride, and I've seen it before, and I was just watching it and noticing it. And I noticed like it was getting towards the end, right? Where she like runs away and then they end up getting married in the end. But right, I noticed like I'm in the emotion of it. Like I'm feeling connected. You like, right? Even though I've seen it before, like you just want the happily ever after. I want to feel the love for them, right? And I noticed my husband like talking to me, and I just noticed my brain being like, don't say anything. Like you're going to ruin it, right? You're going to ruin the emotion of it, right? But this is why we want to watch a TV show. This is why we want to go to a movie. This is why some people, not me, love to go to sporting events, right? This is why we want to buy something. We want to buy a new outfit. This is why we want to do anything. We want the emotion. But then we tell ourselves we don't have time for it, right? And if you want to lose weight and have it be easy and effortless and permanent, you must be aware of the emotions in your body, because any relationship is based on emotion, right? So your relationship with food is based on emotion. So you might want to be aware, right? Remember, feelings is the awareness of the emotion in your body. You might want to be aware of your feelings and your emotion in your relationship with food if you want to change it for good. So here's 3 questions I want you to ask yourself. What emotions do you want? What emotions are you searching for? Are you craving, right? And just 1 or 2. And then the second question I want you to ask yourself is, what emotions do you avoid? And then the third thing I want you to ask yourself is, what emotions are habitual, your quote unquote normal state? So for me, the emotions I always used to want, I used to be searching for relaxation and calm. Those 2. I used to just tell myself, when I get this done, I can finally relax. When I get this done, I can finally relax. I was constantly searching for relaxation. And what emotions do you want to avoid? I always wanted to avoid anxiety and awkward. I always was like, I'm so awkward. I just wanted to avoid it. And what emotions are habitual? What are your normal state emotions? My habitual emotions used to be rushed, urgent, frantic, and resistant. And if those are your habitual emotions, rushed, urgent, frantic, resistant, rebellious, right? It's because you want to avoid other emotions, right? So I wanted to avoid feeling anxious and awkward. So my brain was subconsciously looking to distract myself from them. So it was like constantly on the search, right? It was constantly feeling like rush and urgent and frantic. How do we stop feeling anxious? How do we stop feeling awkward? How do we stop feeling anxious? How do we stop feeling awkward, right? And it was searching. It was like, we got to find the relaxation. We got to find the calm. It was just like this perpetual cycle of emotions I wanted, but I could never actually get to the emotions I wanted because I was too busy being in my habitual normal state of rushed, frantic, urgent, trying to avoid anxious and awkward. And so I was always on edge, wanting to like quick get done with work so I could come home and relax. And I didn't even know how to relax on my own. I needed food or TV show or a podcast or some distraction because I didn't know how to actually relax. I didn't know how to create an emotion in my body of calm and relaxation on my own. And here's the last thing we're going to talk about is dopamine. So like we were talking about before, there are 3 ligands that Candace talks about in her book. And she talks about peptides being the most prevalent. They travel long distances. And she also talks about neurotransmitters. And the third one is steroids. But here I want to talk about the neurotransmitter dopamine. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter that moves across the synapses and the gaps in between neurons, right, to send messages. So if you think about dopamine is the pleasure neurotransmitter, right? And most of our brains are on the hunt for dopamine. And we are on the hunt even more so when we're stressed, anxious, and rushed. And when we don't know how to change those habitual emotional states, all of a sudden our brain is like on this constant hunt for dopamine. How do we get it? Right? And when it does that, it's usually looking for something external. Let me buy something. Let me go on Facebook. Let me check my Instagram, right? Let me even, get something done quick at work. Let me answer some emails. It's kind of like this bouncing around constant hunt for dopamine. Gossiping, judging other people, being righteous, spinning in your mind, right? A glass of wine, right? Having a snack. Like these are all the quick hit kind of dopamine hunts that our brain goes on. And think about 2 types of dopamine existing, right? There's the quick hit, there's the fleeting, there's the it's fast and it doesn't last dopamine, right? There's the food, there's the TV, there's the wine, right? There's the Facebook, there's the YouTube, right? It feels like a drug. And when we have these quick hits of dopamine, we get a little bit of like an anxious aftermath that happens. And it can be slight, it can be subtle. Sometimes it's strong, right? And there's drugs that actually mimic dopamine, right? Shocker. Or not, right? Because it's addictive. And we need more and more and more and more of it, right? When it's this quick hit dopamine that we're constantly searching for, when it's something external, right? And so if we're constantly searching for food and snacks and wine and Facebook and TV, right? We're like on the constant hunt. When that is what our brain is doing, what's so fascinating is it is looking for those quick hits of dopamine, and it's the anticipation of it that we get addicted to, right? It's not even necessarily the actual thing itself. It's what I used to be working, and it might be 2 or 3 in the afternoon. I'd be like, oh, I can't have anything. I gotta wait till I get home because then I can finally relax, right? And I would be thinking about what I was going to eat when I got home. Am I going to have this? And I'm going to have this. And, maybe I'm going to watch this TV show and I'm going to have this glass of wine. My brain would be on the hunt for this quick hits of dopamine. And it would be the anticipation of it that was more enjoyable than the actual event itself. And how we know this is true is because for me, I used to be watching TV, eating my snacks, drinking my wine, being on my phone at the same time. So if the actual food itself was that enjoyable, I wouldn't have had 4 other distractions going on at the same time, right? So that's one type of dopamine. The quick hit fleeting search that our brains often go on. And it's often a response to a constant habitual emotional state of stressed and anxious and rushed and frantic. So that's the one type. But then I want you to think about this. There's the slow burn dopamine. This is the long-lasting dopamine. This is the accomplishment dopamine. This is the type of dopamine that comes when you are future self-focused, when you do things for your long-term best interest, right? And this is why in Naturally Thin for Life, I teach everyone the step-by-steps in a particular progression. And you learn in the program these future-focused tools as well, right? But first, you have to learn step-by-step how to actually be aware of your emotions, how to feel your feelings, how to release those feelings, how to change your relationship with hunger, right? You do all that first, right? In the progression that you learn. And it's in a pretty short period of time, right? You learn all of those tools within 30 days or so, and then you make them permanent in 90 days. But the reason you do this, right, is because you need to actually understand, oh, this is my habitual emotional state. This is driving what I'm doing, what I'm not doing, right? And then you learn some future focus tools, right? You learn, oh, how do I actually want to feel when I go to bed tonight? right? If you're not aware of why you aren't thinking that way and not feeling that way and not thinking about your future self, feeling light and airy and energized going to bed and having the tools to actually change it, it's really hard then to sometimes tap into your future self, right? And so when you are in the slow burn dopamine, right? That is the long lasting sense of accomplishment. That's knowing you're taking care of yourself by not overeating and going to bed the way you want to feel, right? And when you have this future focused desire, what happens is instead of your brain looking for the quick hunt of like, how can I get a quick hit? How can I distract myself? How can I quick escape, right? And get that quick hit, that quick pleasure, but kind of left with this slight anxious residue. Instead of that, when you use your dopamine and you use your desire to feel energized, to imagine yourself going to bed, feeling the way you want to feel, you use that desire to love the way you feel in your body. When you imagine walking into your closet and only having one set of clothes, you use that desire to feel alive, vibrant, and energized, right? Then your desire, if you imagine, right, like a compass, all of a sudden your desire, it stops being so hyper-focused on those quick hits. And it starts becoming so much more future focused, and it starts becoming focused in a way that you're taking care of your naturally thin future self, right? And you do this because you know how to change your emotional state, right? When you're not feeling so frantic and stressed and anxious and rushed all the time, all of a sudden the need for that quick hit of a snack or wine or TV, it kind of starts to go away because you know how to feel relaxed and calm without any of those things, right? So I still have snacks and watch TV and go on my phone sometimes, right? But I don't need to do those things as a way to escape my habitual emotional state of stressed and anxious and rushed and frantic. Right. So then your dopamine is redirected. Your dopamine stops looking for that quick hit, right? That stops being your habit. And instead, your dopamine is directed towards long lasting desire, right? The long lasting energized feeling in your body, the long lasting accomplishment of completing a project. And then that is where your dopamine is redirected, then you actually know how to feel joy and love and gratitude and excited for more than just a blip of a second, for more than just a fleeting moment. So my friends, what is the tune of your orchestra? What is the habitual emotional state in your body and what do you want it to be? What are you avoiding? What I want you to do is be so aware of what is the emotion in my body, right? That's just what's happening chemically, right? And when you're aware of that tune of your orchestra, is it a quick, fast pace? I imagine like Phantom of the Opera all of the time, right? Is it the constant search and hunt for quick hits of dopamine? Is it anticipating food as a way to relax more than enjoying your actual life, right? What do you want then the tune of your orchestra to be? And you want to redirect your desire from that quick hit, anxious residue to what you want for your life, to that future focused desire, right? What is your naturally thin self? Think about differently. What is the tune of the orchestra in your body when you are naturally thin, and how is it different than what it is today? And friends, this is a skill for life. It, like I said in the beginning, it still shocks me, right? This is fundamental human awareness. This should be like awareness 101, right? All of your action comes from your emotions, right? The cells in your body have to orchestrate and work together for you to do anything or to not do anything. And that comes from your emotional state, right? And your feelings is simply your awareness of that emotional state. Most people don't understand that this is how our bodies actually work, right? But we must understand this and know how to apply it in order to make a deliberate, lifelong change. And so if you don't know how to even be aware of this, how to even be aware of your feelings, or you want to be more aware, or maybe you are somewhat aware and you want to change them, this is how you break any habits that aren't serving you and how you create lifelong habits, right? It's why, if you heard Sue a couple of weeks ago, it's why she had such quick progress, because she felt so in control within a week, right? Because she felt in control of her emotional state, right? And it's like I said before, it's like the conductor of the orchestra knowing that he wants the tune to be joy and it not always being that way, but knowing how to course correct, knowing how to have the awareness to say, oh, we're not playing the tune of joy right now, right? Is it the violin or is it the bass or is it the piano player, right? Who's off right now? And let me course correct and let me come back to orchestrating, right? That joy in your body or focus or productive or whatever it is that you want. And food and excess weight, right? Your relationship with food, having excess weight on your body and or obsessing about your weight, it is a symptom. It is a symptom of either one, not being aware of what emotions are in your body that are running your behavior, or two, not knowing how to change them consciously, right? So you must know and be aware of what emotions are in your body running your behavior, and then have a tool set, have a skill set to know how to actually change them consciously if you want to create a different relationship with your body so that it's not something you have to constantly be thinking about all of the time. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with is this, that we talk a lot here on the podcast, and a lot of people talk about, right? We got to change the way that we're thinking, right? We got to change the thought process driving our behavior. Yes, this is true, but you must feel the vibrational, emotional state in your body change, right? And so how you know if your thought process has actually changed is that you feel different. Right? The tune of your orchestra in your body is different. And how you know that is you're aware of your emotions and you actually have a different feeling in your body, right? And then how you know if you have a different feeling is your actions have changed, right? You stop even thinking about food when you're stressed. You stop even distracting yourself and munching on dinner while you're making it. You notice, right? Those actions have changed. Why? Because the emotions driving all of your action have changed, right? And when you change your emotions, you don't have to micromanage your actions. They just automatically change. All right, my friends, I hope you all take this to heart and become more aware of the tune of your orchestra so that you can create the tune of the orchestra that you want, so that you can have the freedom of being naturally thin. And it all comes back to this. It comes back to understanding your current emotional state by being aware of and knowing what you're feeling, and then changing those emotions to feel the way you want to feel so that you only ever want to eat when you're hungry, you easily stop when you're satisfied, and you choose food that serves your body, and your naturally thin body becomes inevitable. And friends, if you want help with this, make sure to come on over and check out the Naturally Thin for Life program so you can get the step-by-step guide so that I can take you in through the program in a very structured step-by-step way so that you get everything in the right order and that you have all the tools to make this permanent change for good. Friends, I hope you all have a great week. I will talk to you next time. Friend, if you are loving what you are learning here on the podcast, you have to come check out my Naturally Thin for Life program. It is my on-demand lifetime access program where I teach you brand new concepts not taught here on the podcast. And I will walk you through exactly how to implement all of the tools I teach you here so that they become just a part of you. You will learn exactly how to understand your specific brain and your specific body so that you become naturally thin for the rest of your life and you no longer struggle with your weight. Inside of the Naturally Thin for Life program, you can also receive live help so that you consistently make progress and reach your goal. I will teach you how to accelerate your naturally thin journey in a sustainable way so that the change becomes permanent. The best part is that it's risk-free. You either love it or I will give you your money back. If you are ready to finally be naturally thin for life, join us at lauradixoncoaching.com/work with me. That's LAURADIXON coaching.com and click on the Work With Me tab. I cannot wait to see you there.